Hello, my name is Rosario Granados. I am the Marilyn Thomas Associate Curator, Art of the Spanish Americas at the Blanton Museum of Art at the University of Austin. And I'm here very proud of having a conversation with Dr. Susan Dean Smith, who is an associate professor in the Department of History, also here at UT, about a fascinating pictorial genre made in most always in Mexico, the Casta paintings. Hello, Susan.
Hello, Rosario. It's a pleasure to be here and to have this conversation with you, as always, and to talk about one of my favorite topics, the Casta paintings.
You have written extensively about this topic, and I think it is wonderful to have you here. The reason why we're doing this, and I'm going to make the slides bigger, is because in Painted Cloth, the exhibition that I curated, that I organized, and that is currently on view at the Blanton. We have 12 examples of Casta paintings. We are displaying them mainly to show how garments were made, how textile arts were produced, but also to talk about how diverse society was in Mexico and in Peru during the colonial period. But so it is just a pretext, and I think it is important to know that various colleagues have been talking about these objects for many years. This is just a sample, right, Susan, of all the many people that have talked about the Casta paintings. I think the pioneer work of Maria Concepcion Garcia Saiz in 1989, it's impossible to miss, but also the exhibition and exhibition catalog that Ilona Katsu put together in 1996, which we are, as you can see, we are honoring, by sort of mimicking in the name of this conversation as a little honor to recognize the importance of those two pioneer works.
And I would just like to follow up with the comment that certainly the works that you see really have been foundational in bringing to our attention the importance of this incredible genre, but also in inspiring numerous research. There are articles published every year on different aspects of the Casta genre, and continually deepening our understanding of this very quite enigmatic, I think, genre. And I do just want to also mention that I believe, Rosario, that on the website for Painted Cloth, there is going to be an extensive bibliography and listing of museums in the US that have Casta paintings that viewers can consult.
Yes, and that document also has some of them other many works. It's impossible for us right now to mention all the different aspects that can be considered in this particularly kind of paintings. But so the available on the website of Painted Cloth is going to be this list. And this is just a very beginning, of the material that one should read or be familiarized in order to get a sense of the complexity of the Casta paintings. But before we start, Susan, what is Casta?
Yes.
It's
Well,
we need to start there, because
okay.
even it's in the name of the genre. And in many places, specifically in the US and maybe in the United Kingdom as well, there is a whole conversation about race, no, how race is depicted here. But so why they call them casta?
Yes, just at a very simple level, you'll see in front of you on the left-hand side is a definition from Covarrubias's 1611 dictionary, where casta is defined very simply as meaning of noble lineage, or castizo, which is of good lineage or line and descendancy. It's interesting because if we shift very quickly to the 1780 definition, an update of the Diccionario de Autoridades, there we begin to see more differentiated definitions. Casta, again, simply generation or lineage. But interestingly enough, that is followed up with it can also mean the generation of something irrational. And then as we move down into hacer casta, that's where we begin to see it referencing certain animals, different species of animals. And that, I think, is what has been picked up on with many of the categories and classifications that we see in the casta genre that refer to zoological terms like lobo, wolf, or coyote.
And what I love about what you just said is that the genre of painting, it seems that it developed while the term casta was developing itself.
Yes.
You know, so I don't know if we can move to if you can tell us a bit more about how the genre started and when started, so we can connect this with the definition of casta itself that we just saw in the previous slide.
Yes, and as far as we know, the earliest rendition of what becomes the casta painting are these single portrayals of at the far left, a mulatta, a rather beautiful mulatta by Ariano, and then what would have been the companion, which is now this painting, unfortunately, is missing, but also the offspring with his father. And then on the far right, you will see what really becomes the template, where the individuals aren't separated but brought into the same pictorial frame, with the woman, the man, and the offspring. And that is one of the earliest on the far right, attributed to Rodriguez Juarez. But what's very interesting about the Arianos, these are dated to 1711, and I think that's it's significant because this is a very politically volatile time. If we're thinking about the emergence of the casta genre with its tropes of concern with hierarchy and order and stability, they're actually being created during a period of extreme political stability. Certainly in Mexico, for example, just almost 10 years later, Mexico is still recovering from one of its most serious political uprisings in 1692. 1700, there is a change of dynasty from the Habsburgs to the Bourbons and all of the political wranglings that surround power grabs from both England and France, for example, during that period. what comes with that also, with the new Bourbon dynasty, is this tremendous interest in collections, in curiosity, in exotica, the creation of public museums and libraries. And so there's this tremendous push on the part of the Spanish monarchy to collect up whatever may be deemed curious or peculiar or unusual. It's a continual form of mapping. The Spaniards have been literally and figuratively mapping its colonial possessions since the 16th century. And I think this fits into that very well.
And I think it's incredibly important how all these different ideas of order are also established by the way the people are dressed. No, it's incredibly important to recognize who each role each individual should be playing because of the way they're dressed. Yes. But who were the painters? Can you talk a little bit more?
Yes.
You mentioned Rodriguez Juarez, but we know that important painters like José de Ibarra or Miguel Cabrera, illustrated here, were also very engaged in producing these paintings.
Yes, and I think that is it really signals just how important this genre becomes, because as you could tell from even with the Ariano Diseño and the Rodriguez Juarez, and you look at these two absolutely gorgeous paintings. We certainly have the most prominent painters who are engaged in this genre, are innovating in the genre, as you say. I mean, if you look at both Ibarra and Cabrera, the attention to detail, the attention to the fabrics, it's very tactile. I mean, you can almost hear those silks rustling, as it were. We do see certainly members of the Royal Academy of San Carlos, Clapera, Francisco Clapera, for example, who was an academician from San Fernando in Madrid, who moves to Mexico. He is also author of a series, and also Alcibar, who is heavily connected as an assistant director of painting at the Academy. All of these prominent artists are engaged.
And many of whom they were of mixed race as well, no? Like Cabrera himself.
Yes, and certainly Ibarra. I think that's a really interesting question, because it's not just a question of being of mixed race. It's also a question of actually the status of what it means to be a painter. We can't assume that during this period, being a painter was necessarily acknowledged to be high status. And I think that's a really interesting parallel, that it is precisely during this, really beginning from the 1670s, 1680s onwards, the painters in colonial Mexico are engaged in attempts to elevate the status of painting. All of these, Ibarra, Rodriguez Juarez, Cabrera, they are major in doing that. So I think we have to be, first of all, we have to be careful about essentializing. In other words, because someone is of mixed race, does that mean they're going to produce a particular representation? Because they also have other concerns about their status.
Exactly.
as a painter.
And I think, and we're going to talk about more, because I think these are representations not only about race, but also, and perhaps more importantly, about class. No, I think it's important to have these two. But before we move on, can we talk about the sizes of these things? Where they were displayed? I mean, yes. As you can see here, the berruecos that are now at Museo de America, in the slide below, they're huge. Yes. I took this picture a few months ago, and you see the person over there, they're massive. Yes. And at the same time, we have very small ones, like the one on top on the Museo de Historia Mexicana in Monterrey. They were made on copper. They were made on canvas, most of them, but there are also some similar renditions of this on paper. So what was the original display of these paintings?
It's a great question, and from what we know, which isn't a lot, from documentary evidence, certainly there would be different, both private and public or semi-public spaces, because from what we know about the patrons, certainly high-ranking bureaucrats, certainly viceroys who are finishing their tenure as viceroy and return back to Spain, or send back some of them. So as you can see from the top, most of these series would have 16 individual canvases. And even if those 16 canvases are of moderate size, that's quite a bit of wall space. Yes. I mean, it wouldn't fit in my house. It's quite a bit of wall space that's going to be taken up. So
and that's why I think this question will take us directly to patronage. But before that, I think it's important to think that they were, with a comment that you just made, they were in the creation of cabinets of natural history, right? Yes. And so they were these early versions of what museums are today. They were perfect for this very extended collection of paintings. But what happened if someone was not rich enough and they still wanted a Casta painting?
Well, they got one cabinet, didn't they? And this is what I think is wonderful. And I know in previous conversations, Rosario, you've heard me say this many times, and perhaps in desperation, but the Casta genre, when you look at it as a corpus, as a whole, they really do become their own best evidence, since there is so little written evidence about them. And so, here we have an answer to your question, and obviously an answer to a problem for a painter who is thinking about, I have this patron, he's not particularly well-to-do, but he wants one of these. Here's the solution. You get a single canvas and you divide it into 16 or 12 or however many different panels you need, and that's how you end up with these individual one that could be hung very nicely in a small cabinet or on a wall somewhere. What I want to emphasize about these two, and again thinking about how do they become their own best evidence, is first of all, the anonymous one on the left is interesting for two reasons. One is it introduces us to the term calidad. So not just casta, but calidad, and calidad is a very capacious term because it incorporates something that you just a point you made earlier, which is it's not just about race, it's about a cluster of characteristics. Who your network is, what you do for a living, what your reputation is. It's not just about phenotype. So that gives us, I think, a really good insight into kind of the mental grid that the artists are working for. A second aspect about this.
Let me just interrupt there, because I think it's important to contextualize this with the concept of cleanliness of blood, no?
Yes.
La limpieza de sangre. And so it's also implied in calidad, for how many generations you have been devout and good Christian, no?
Yes, yes.
And I think that's why also we tend to think about these representations as families, no? Because they're under this big umbrella of only the marriage as the right institution to procreate a family, no?
Yes.
And I think it's embedded in all these melange of aspects that you're talking about, no? That is class, race, gender, religion, and all that, no?
Yes.
But next to the calidad, it says that was made in Puebla de Los Ángeles. So
exactly.
I guess that's where you wanted to go. Were these the only two places where Casta paintings were made?
No, I believe they were also made in Guadalajara. I think there are there's one other place, but that's the only one that I can think of at the moment, other than Puebla and Mexico City. But I could be wrong on that, but definitely Puebla and Mexico City. So again, the point being, of course, is that they are not just confined to Mexico City, and in fact, the Berroeco, or the Berroecos that we saw at the Museo de America in the previous slide, he of course is a poblano artist, and he was also commissioned by Bishop Loaiza for a Casta series as well in the 1740s. So again, interesting regional distribution there. The single canvas on the right is also interesting, because it's one of the few that actually incorporates both the artist's name and the patron. And let me just need to I just want to read this, because I think it's important. The inscription at the bottom reads, "These casts of New Spain, painted at the request of the Lieutenant Colonel of the Army, Don Antonio Rafael de Aguilera y Orense, his worthy friend, and passionate about this art, by Don Ignacio Maria Barreda y Ordóñez, in Mexico, 18th of February of the year 1777. That's a pretty extensive.
It has all the information that we would like to have it of all of them.
Yes, exactly. And then the other really interesting aspect about this is that this is also one of the few Mexican paintings that includes the term criollo. Usually criollo is subsumed by Español, criollo being the offspring of two Spaniards born in the Americas, or born in New Spain. But typically that term is not used, and we're going to be revisiting that when we look at the Peruvian.
And that is also one of the most complex to translate into English, right? Because if you say Creole, then it might be other thing, no more related to the Caribbean. Something that I noticed in this one is that it includes, we have not seen that in the examples before, is the representation of the Indios Mecos at the bottom. This idea of the uncivilized, non-Christian indigenous people, what other kind of behaviors were depicted in Casta paintings?
Well, there we have it. As you will see, aside from uncivilized, obviously violence, domestic violence, which I think becomes very much, or can become, a cipher for the dangers of interracial mixing. That will create forms of degenerate behavior, because it is not perceived to be appropriate to have those racial mixings. I think this is really interesting too, with these three examples, because clearly this is across a wide range of racial mixings, so that you have a Spanish woman and a mulatto, you have a Spanish man and an African woman, and you have a coyote, which of course is someone of multiple mixtures, and an Indian. So this, again, I would also like to comment, the more I look at these, one of the aspects that we really have so little understanding of is what intervention a patron may have. I think we have a good understanding just from the series themselves that certainly painters worked with one another, they saw each other's works, they used each other's works as models, and then created their own interpretations and variations. But I would really like to know much more, especially when you do get these scenes of violence, of if a patron had a specific idea about what his or her sense of an ordered society should look like.
Like these ones, no?
Yes.
What I think it's interesting is that we talked before that we assume that these are families, no? But in these two images that are could be labeled as loving families, no, or well-behaved, not violent as the women we saw before. It's clear that the emotional connection here is not as evident, because it could be that these mulatto women or Black women are the servants, the slaves of these Spanish men. But despite that, what they're aiming to show, it's the order that you mentioned before.
Yes.
But so what is the sense of what other images can we find in Casta paintings? What are the deceptions or omissions beyond this idea of order that is
again, it's another great question, and it's always been interesting to me that for the most part, painters, for example, painters, gilders, architects, sculptors, and certainly members of the clergy, for the most part, they are completely absent. The representation of the artist in his taller on the right, and then the gilder on the left. Again, to my knowledge, these are the only ones. And over something like 2,000 individual paintings where they appear. I have my own theory on that. It's very noticeable that the Spanish painter obviously is very, very well to do, as is his wife or his sitter. The gilder is not.
Mm-hmm.
And I suspect this also taps into whoever painted this series, once again, into artists' concerns and frustrations about the fragility of the guild, about the status of painters, about who could and who could not be a member of the guild, because there were attempts to exclude non-Spaniards. So there are multiple layers that we have to consider here,
and that's why in Painted Cloth we have one series that includes representations of women at work, and it's very rare. Normally, women are not depicted, creating things.
Yes.
We have this similar example here, which is working with the spinning wheel. But so from there, can you tell us a bit more about other kind of exceptions that we have on the corpus?
Yeah, and again, this is it's one of the better known Casta paintings. Again, single canvas, cabinet size. If you go to the Museo de America in Madrid, you'll be able to see it hanging in a mock-up cabinet. What's unusual about it is, of course, the appearance of Guadalupe at the top. It's the only Casta painting that has not just the Guadalupe, but, as I said earlier, any kind of religious implication whatsoever.
And that I love, that the Meco is here, not at the bottom, but it's incorporated in the mix of, and he is married or represented nonetheless, and with a Spanish looking woman, which I think it's fabulous in terms of how religion is being depicted. But can we go now to the development of the genre, and why we have seen a lot of domestic settings, but these two are different in that sense.
Yeah. And again, it just I think these two, and of course there are many, but these two give an example of the vitality of the genre. If we keep in mind that this is a genre that evolves over basically 100 years, and so I'm always fascinated by its vitality. And on the right here you see the development is to kind of move the trio away from the middle and the foregrounding in the painting, sort of off to the side, so that we can, or the painter can bring in other identifiable scenes and places in Mexico. So again, increasingly localizing. And of course, that's what the Virgen of Guadalupe is doing in the previous slide with Luis de Mena. But here we have this grounding of the Alameda, which again is also a cipher for the urbanization, the modernity of late colonial Mexico. And likewise on the left-hand side, this is much more, it's not such a sophisticated rendering. This is kind of more of a pastoral rural scene, but nevertheless bringing in other elements of people's lives and places. And again, there is always something new with each of these that again is endlessly fascinating, because what you will see here on the left hand side is the black man and the Spanish woman. Very rare to see those combined. There are several others, but for the most part, they are quite rare. But again, very harmonious. A child on what I believe is a sheep. But this is just sheer harmony. And I really want to emphasize here, when you start looking at these collectively, you begin to see the instability of messages. You begin to see the malleability. So how, whatever people's or the patrons' intentions were about a fixed order, it is anything but. And to me, that is one of the most fascinating aspects.
And I think that's completely clear in the way the garments are portrayed. No, because here we have a black man wearing a French-inspired garment, no, as if he were, or he's wearing exactly the same suit that the Spanish man on the right is wearing. Yes. And I think it talks about this process that you are talking about. But let us go to Peru. There's only one series that we know that was made in Peru, and it's significant, right? Because it's they share many of the same regulations. They share the same combination of peoples. No, they had the same two republics. No, that aim to have indigenous and Spaniards people not living together. But why do you think in Peru there was only one series made? I don't know if there's an answer to that question. But also, if you can tell us a bit more, what is different in the series made in Peru when compared to the other ones made in Mexico?
I mean, I think to answer the first question, why is there only one series? I really don't have a good answer
I think we know.
to that, Rosario. Obviously there is something about the relative density of patrons, of demand, of interest. But you have a lot of incredible painters in Peru. It may have something to do with sort of the endless physical problems that Peru has with earthquakes and what takes priority. But I really I don't have a single answer. What I think is very different is first of all the use of the term criollo. We had talked about criollo earlier on, and in the Peruvian series, it's made very clear that they are using criollo as an African person who is born in the Americas, which is very different from the idea of a criollo being the offspring of Spaniards. A second aspect about this wonderful series, and by the way, kudos to you to getting this for painted cloth, to have them proximal, because they are extraordinary, is having mixtures of like with like. So they have mulata, mulatto, mulatto, mestiza, mestizo, mestizo. You don't see that in
three members of the same casta, in one panel. Yeah.
but the other, or one other, I mean, one can go on and on and on about this series. One really significant difference is that based on the mixtures that are in the Peruvian series, they permit a return to the pure racial pole of individuals with African descent. That is not deemed a possibility in the Mexican series. It is only the mixture of Spaniards and Indians that can return to the pure racial white pole. And that, I think that is absolutely fascinating to, again, back to my earlier point about instability of understandings, malleability of people's identities, and how those identities are understood.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also important to know that for Amat, the viceroy who commissioned these paintings, he was completely clear that he wanted to show this as a kind of a trophy, right?
Yes.
As a picture for the then prince who would become
Charles III.
Charles
yes.
No, and saying this is for your cabinet of natural history, you need to know your subjects, but they were not really engaged in getting to know those subjects. No, it was only like a picture. No, the colonial gaze in that sense.
Yes, and can I just also say, because I think this is important too, Amat is very explicit about that these are families, and he includes instructions to the Prince of Asturias, who would become king, of how to read those paintings. And so that the child in the first painting is either the mother or the father in the second painting, and so on and so on and so on. That kind of fades out at the ones right at the end, but for the mixtures of Indians and mixtures of blacks, that sequencing is very clear. But let me also say that these paintings, to come back to why are they being produced? Amat sent these back with, and I'm going to quote here, 50 coconuts, 4 dyed pelts, several bolts of white wool, and a wooden weapon. And so you can see how these are being classified, and contextualized.
And at the same time, I think it's, the instructions are telling of how they were confusing to read, no, that they needed to be emphasized, and also the slaves are implied, but they're never described as such, no, which I think it's also interesting to note in both series made in Mexico and in Peru. And so this image is fascinating. And when you first showed it to me, I was like shocked. I didn't know it before we started preparing for this conversation, and I thought it was fantastic, because it is the kind of the summary of the whole thing. They get rid of the noise of the families, and they just portrayed the combination of the different castas. It is, and class here becomes even more noticeable because of that, no?
Right.
And you can see that on the garments that they're wearing, no? From shoes to being barefoot, from long skirts to short ones, from layers of fabric to just one coarse attire. So
Yeah, let me just explain. I mean, and this is where you sort of really get this sense of kind of the intellectualization of the mixtures, because I'm sure viewers can't see the details very well, but each one of these compartments is numbered. So the first one is number 1, India. The second is 2, Espanol. And then the third is Negra. And then, so if we go to the second panel,
the second tier.
The mestiza is, am I getting this right? The mestiza is number 4, correct? Right there.
Yeah, here.
Yes. And then the numbers become variations. So each successive one, if you mix, let's see, if you were to mix 1 and 2, who becomes the mulatta, then she becomes number 5. It becomes a parlor game in some ways. But as you say, the detail of the individuals, including the woman with her dog, which is quite charming. There, it's really, it's a stunning piece,
and a way of understanding what is the afterlife of the genre, no?
Yes.
And I think it is fantastic to learn how, you know, in 100 years this whole depiction of peoples really transformed into this very scientific, classification of little boxes, little niches that could be, referred to, that could refer to seeds or any other natural organism, and not people at all.
Yes.
And we are about to be done with our hour-long conversation. Thank you so much for joining me on this very hard task of making sense of Casta paintings. They're very difficult to really understand. I don't know if we are going to be able to really say the last word any day soon about what do they mean and what do they implied for society.
Well,
but we want to before we end, we should at least try to understand how these things were seen at the time.
Yes, and again, this is one of the, I think, the most difficult to get at, but I think one of the most important, to understand that not all individuals at the time agreed on the importance or even the accuracy of Casta paintings. And so you have, for example, Andres Arce y Miranda, also from Puebla, a theologian, one of our major sources on the Casta paintings. He was very distressed by the message that he perceived that the Casta paintings had. And I think something about Arce y Miranda that is super interesting is, it's not included in this quote, but he actually sat in with an artist and asked the artist to explain to him what he was seeing, because he couldn't understand all of the terms. And so to me, that's one of those small but really important insights, that you've actually got someone asking the artist what's going on here. But for Arce y Miranda, the danger was that for him, as a Creole in 18th century Mexico, that the message to the rest of the world from the Casta paintings was that all people in Mexico or in the Americas were of mixed race. That to him was a problem. We
of
can
course, no, as a criollo himself, he wanted to claim that his lineage was not of mixed race, right?
Exactly. And I do have there at the bottom, because we talked about this, you'll see there, speaking of the term criollo, and how it's something of a problem. As he says, Creole ought to be, excuse me, it would be a worthwhile undertaking befitting of your ingenuity and honor to banish from the dictionary of critic and the vocabulary of the discerning the name of Creole, because it was invented for the children of Black slaves born in America. So that's where his concern. And again, here we go. We are back to this malleability, to multiple understandings. I think there is such a tendency with some commentaries on the Casta paintings that there's a homogeneous understanding of them, both in production and reception. And I think that's, for me, I'm not persuaded by that.
No, and I think that's why we have so many contemporary scholarship written about those, no, because you can do different readings, and I think that's what true artworks actually do, no, that they have so many. They're like really like open-ending questions more than safe perspectives, or only one perspective. That they open up much more than what they actually show.
Yes, exactly. And then just very quickly, on the top right, this is a quote from an English traveler, Richard Twiss, who is traveling in the 1770s in Portugal and Spain. He has seen several Casta series, obviously, that have been sent from Mexico back to Spain, and he is in Malaga. And for him, as he says, though they may appear somewhat unintelligible, and it will be very difficult to prove the truth of what is there in advanced. So, here you have the skeptic in terms of what is it I'm actually seeing here and what claims are being made. It's wonderful. But my absolute favorite, and I have to thank Dr. Rebecca Earle for this, is, again, speaking of the afterlives of the Casta genre. As we know, the Casta genre pretty much disappears after Mexican independence and kind of morphs into costumbrismo. But the paintings don't disappear. And they are obviously they're in private collections, in museums, but they are also being circulated because they are being sold or gifted. And this is taken from an advert in the Morning Post, 12th of March, 1801, that is advertising the sale of a series of Casta paintings that are attributed to Velázquez, no less, and described as Velázquez's gradations of color. And described as without exception, the most interesting and valuable productions ever publicly exhibited. So, here is the beginning of a new afterlife of the Casta paintings. Once they get out of that orbit of of Mexico and Spain and become recontextualized and reperceived as they start to become a commodity to be purchased and sold.
With no context whatsoever, no? Because
exactly.
the fact that someone saying this and giving this title and this attribution means that it's not familiar at all with what the Hispanic world was, no? Which exactly. I think it's very telling, no, of the diversity of meanings as well.
Absolutely.
That this
Absolutely. Yes. And look where we are now. I mean, the Casta genre is just so intriguing, so desirable in many ways.
And it will continue to inspire us, because I'm going to go to our last slide to talk about a series of performances that we're going to have at the Blanton Museum of Art with Savage Vanguard Theater, who is going to be playing a play that has multilingual and features music, puppetry, and dance, talking about how this diversity of races, of castas, continue to live together in the modern United States. I think it's a testimony of how these paintings continue to be alive and how intriguing they are. No, that we don't know. I think we all agree that they are that this classification can be offensive, no, for many people. But we continue to be intrigued on how these objects were received by other people, no, that share that mixed race background. And I think it's interesting because as a woman who identifies as a mixed race myself, I never thought about these paintings as offensive. But with all the recent conversations that we're having, both in the academia and in the outside world, I think they're shifting again their meaning, and we have to be more inclusive, no, and more aware of how the contemporary readings that they can have now are different from the period when they were made.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much, Susan, for this conversation. I think we're going to have to leave it here, this dialogue. But I hope that whoever is seeing this video on the Blanton's YouTube channel find some topics of interest and will be reminded of how important this particular genre is for the history of the artistic production in the Spanish Americas. We hope you can become a member of the Blanton Museum, and to support with that you would be supporting more conversations like the one that you just watched. So thank you so much to Susan, and thank you so much for to all the people watching this.
Thank you, Rosario.
Bye-bye.
Bye.